Welcome back, everybody. Football season may officially be done, but it never really is. And that is a perfect segue for our next guest, because I texted him last night and said, hey, you know what? There's no shortage of things to chat about, and people love your segment. Would you mind keep going? And he graciously accepted that. It's great to see Sam Herder after I made him freeze outside Toyota Stadium last Monday. No frostbite, right? You were all good from that?
Yeah, all good. I forgot my gloves that morning, and so I'm holding the microphone, and my hand started to go numb. So I'm like, I hope I don't drop this thing. But no, we made it through just okay. And right now in the Twin Cities, it's like -4, and so it wasn't that bad, relatively speaking.
Correct. Last look at Frisco. They had a heck of a send-off for a game. I sat next to you upstairs during the game, and I'm looking at it like, oh, man, at halftime, really? We're going to get another drubbing? We got a great second-half finish and a proper send-off. If that was the last one in Frisco, they got a good one.
Yeah, it was the first half was definitely jarring because this game had as much hype as any, and to see the 21-3 halftime lead, everyone was almost kind of shell-shocked in a way. But that second half, I think, was kind of what we were expecting, with both offenses getting it done and kind of back and forth quarterback duo. And so it was good to see that drama in the second half, just because we hadn't seen that for a few years in the FCS title game. And to have both of those fan bases there that really wanted to win, that really wanted to win that one, for it to be under the lights, it was just a really cool scene, great atmosphere, and like you said, a great send-off for Frisco for the time being, or for forever. We'll just have to see what the next steps are as far as what happens after Nashville.
The last 6 days, what's been the common refrain for people that you deal with in FCS after another North Dakota State championship?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of continuing to be impressed with what NDSU is doing, continuing to win FCS titles, no matter who is the head coach, or no matter who is the standout. The fact that Bryce Lance goes from a guy that not many people knew about, casual FCS observers, like they knew Trey Lance had a younger brother on the team, but they didn't know much about Bryce Lance because he wasn't an impact player. For him to just emerge and be a huge difference maker in these last two games, I think people just look at that, and first year head coach Tim Polisic, and just go, they keep on rolling no matter who they lose. On the other hand, there's also kind of a collective sigh of this NDSU team that I think is still really, really good, but sometimes we get into the habit of comparing current teams to the 2018 team, and we go, well, maybe they're not so good because they don't have this, they don't have that, rather than saying, well, actually they are really, really good, because this was an all-time Montana State team, and they weren't able to get it done. So I think there's also kind of a collective sigh of, this was a year where it looked like not only a different team could win, but a different conference could win. Everything was stacking up for a different conference to kind of raise that trophy. And Montana State obviously fell short of that.
Couple things before I want to we'll look ahead to 25, which previews are going to start here this week, because that's how things go. We talked at the top of the show, the Bison looked like if they got through this portal window unscathed. I asked you off air, a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most surprised they didn't lose anybody. You and I are both like 8 or 9. I'm stunned. I really thought that somebody would go, but that tells you what the collective is doing here. And that's why other FCS schools are at a disadvantage that don't have one or is trying to start one, because the Bison were able to retain their players.
Yeah, I figured at least one, guy would depart. And as far as like an impact player, I'm sure there's, some four-string linebacker, third-string offensive lineman, or whatever, for example, that have tested the portal waters. But as far as the standout players, it's funny, because I think it was on one of your shows last week, you were naming off like all the guys who potentially could be FBS targets. And then a few days ago, whenever it was, maybe over the weekend, Tim Polisic tweets out a graphic of all those players that you mentioned on there. And I go, okay, I'm guessing this means all of those guys are coming back. And so I think it's one thing where it goes to show, culture is kind of a buzzword and all that, but if you can have a tight knit locker room, that helps in keeping guys. Having a collective definitely helps. I'm sure NDSU's collective wasn't able to match what some of the offers were, but it's easier to stay for $100,000 than $0 when you're getting offered $200,000, or whatever the case may be. And I also think it's kind of the opposite of a snowball effect, where if one guy leaves, that makes another guy feel better about leaving, and then the third guy feels better about leaving. If there is, let's just say, five NDSU players that are getting really high offers, and four of them stay, and you're the fifth person, like you don't want to be the guy that leaves, and so all of a sudden it makes your decision easier
Yeah.
to stay. So that's just kind of like the ebbs and flows of things. Like South Dakota State obviously was able to keep all their players the last few years until this year. NDSU was kind of losing players. Now they keep all their top players. And so it just kind of goes up and down, ebbs and flows. And right now, NDSU has done a great job of retaining its players this year.
Montana State's lost a handful of guys, and not just home guys. They've lost 3 All-Americans. Sam, how big a deal is that? I know they're a program; they'll be fine, but these aren't run-of-the-mill guys that they've lost over the last 5 days.
Yeah, the Connor Moore offensive lineman, that one
That
wasn't
stinks.
really a surprise. I think they were prepping for that one because he was getting he was getting tampered with during the season with NIL offers waiting for
Yeah.
him. Scottree Humphrey, just being a sophomore, that hurts. Obviously, he was an All-American guy, one of the top running backs as just a sophomore. But at the same time, you kind of felt like it was going to be tough for them to hold on to. Rohan Jones, I think, was a tough
Yep.
one. I actually thought he was a senior, and I had to look back and saw that he was only a junior, but he was an FCS to FCS transfer this last year. And so, transferring twice in 2 years, sometimes can be tough. So I think they were hopeful they were able to hold on to him. They had some DBs transfer as well. Like I think John Johnson, one of their cornerbacks, did. One guy that I think will hurt is Drew Polidor. Really an underrated safety for them. He doesn't splash as far as the numbers he puts up, but he's a super athletic safety. I think Jason X said he was the best safety
Yeah.
in the Big Sky. He originally tweeted out a graphic that said he was staying, and then 2 days later, Polidor changed his mind and entered the portal. So I think that one will hurt. Montana State will have a pretty inexperienced secondary next year. I think they'll be fine at linebacker. I think they'll be good on the defensive line again. I think they'll be. I know they lose Ware and Moore on the offensive line, but they'll have like 3 or 4 guys back that have all had starting experience. So I think there's a good core of guys coming back from Montana State, but quarterback and secondary, kind of the same thing with South Dakota State.
Yep.
Honestly, both teams, quarterback and secondary, are the big question marks. Where everywhere else, there will be new names, but you kind of just like Montana State will have some wide receivers. South Dakota State will have some running backs that step up. It's the quarterback and the secondary for both teams.
Jones announced last night he was going to Arkansas, who he had an okay game. He had a couple drops in the game on Monday night, but he's a good player. Again, all-league player for Montana State this past year. A couple other things I want to hit on. News came out. We know Mark Gronowski's going to Iowa. Found out he needs surgery, arm surgery. Kirk Ferentz said that it's a common related football injury. Jimmy Rogers hinted at this in the post-game press conference after the South Dakota State, North Dakota State semifinal game, Sam, that asking why they didn't throw the Hail Mary at the end and saying that Gronowski has been dealing with this. Looks like he's been dealing it for a while. I don't know if that accounts for, because I looked at how Gronowski threw against Incarnate Word and against Montana. He looked pretty darn good in those 2 games.
Yeah, I don't know when that, I didn't see when exactly that injury hit. But yeah, he was definitely up and down this year. He looked like he was really rolling, like you mentioned, in Montana UIW playoff games, and then looked off again against NDSU. And so, I don't know if it's maybe just kind of a nagging thing that they go in there and kind of scope things out, and the elbow, shoulder. I have no idea, but I just know it, like in for most of the first half of this season, we were kind of talking about why South Dakota State's offense looked so choppy, and it was a combination of new players stepping up, new offensive line, new offensive coordinator, but none of us really said, well, maybe Mark Gronowski is, maybe he's hurt a little bit and dealing with some things, and maybe that was the case in the first half of the season, or maybe that injury happened later on, in the season. I don't know, but obviously Iowa feels good about, it's a routine surgery. He'll be fine, or else they wouldn't have offered him what they did, which
Correct.
I heard was quite a bit for him to go to Iowa.
I guess leaving the Dome that day, I was just assuming, I think we all were, Gronowski was bound for the NFL, but if this was nagging, then clearly he must have thought, or his handlers thought, that you're not going to make it through the screening process of the NFL, that you need to get healthy and use that last year of college ball.
Yeah, and that probably was a part of his decision as well, because I think I read that he'll be able to start doing stuff in like May or June, after the surgery.
Right.
And so obviously, had he declared for the NFL draft, he got invited to the East-West Shrine game, and he wouldn't have been able to do anything there or his pro day had he had this surgery, which of course he did. And so, yeah, I think that was probably, I know he talked about getting more pro ready. Also talked about, financially,
Yep.
taking an opportunity that could set him up for life. But, at the time, he didn't mention anything about the injury, probably because he didn't want it out there at that time. But now that we know he did have an injury and he needs surgery on it,
Yep.
probably played a big factor in his decision as well.
Missouri Valley Defensive Player of the Year, Mike Grace, is going to play at Kentucky. Cincinnati guy. I mean, just he's a disruptor. That's a major loss for the FCS. But watching him play in person on television this year, this guy belongs. I don't know how he got to South Dakota in the first place.
Yeah, it's a weird thing in the FCS right now because the portal has hurt the FCS in the obvious ways where you get a guy like Scottree Humphrey or Mike Grace where they go to the FCS, they develop, and then they leave after
Right.
2 years. But at the same time, the power four programs, they're spending less scholarships on transfers, and so the FCS are able to get guys that slip through the
Correct.
cracks. But it's kind of a double-edged sword because you enjoy them when they're young in their careers and standouts, but you also kind of know that they'll probably be departing, and so you kind of just enjoy them for the 2 3 years you have them, and kind of have the mindset of if we can keep them, great, but if we can't, such as life. Because
Yep.
I remember hearing almost last year at this time about Grace, like, oh, he's going to be a breakout player and they're going to have a tough time holding on to him. And there's a UIW offensive lineman that transferred to somewhere in the Big 12. I can't remember his name, but I remember hearing about him last year that, yeah, he's going
Wow.
to be really good this year and he's probably going to transfer elsewhere after this year. So it's almost just like he's going to be really good. We're probably not going to be able to keep him, but let's just enjoy him for the time
Yeah.
we have. It's just kind of a weird mindset to have, but we're also just so used to it now where it's kind of just how it is right now.
Unfortunately, we're ingrained on that. That just where we're at with things in this level of football. Last thing before I let you go, because we got to talk, rankings and predictions and all that for 2025. I know you're going to put number one, but the other four teams in the top five heading into 2025, who would you have on that list right now?
Yeah, North Dakota State number one for sure. Not just because they're the defending champs, but also who they have coming back. I think South Dakota, I think would be a strong number two.
Okay.
Again, they lose quite a bit with Grace and Tice as well, but with Bauman coming back, Charles Pierre sounds like he's coming back. Their leading tackler on the defensive side of the football is coming back. I think offensive line should be like three or four starters coming back, maybe three, but anytime you have at least three, that's a good starting point for the offensive line. So that's probably the top two. After that, like I think Montana State and South Dakota State are going to take a step back as far as their overall team strength, but they might not take a step back as far as how far they make it in the playoff
Good
bracket
point.
next year. I
Yep.
could see both of them making it to the semifinals.
Mm.
I can see one of them honestly breaking through and making it to the title game just based off of whatever the bracket matchups are. Because I do think Montana State loses a lot, but they have a good core coming back on the offensive and defensive lines and at the skill position. South Dakota State's again, question mark is quarterback and secondary. I think even more so secondary because if Chase Mason hits his potential, he has the chance to be really, really good.
Absolutely. Yep.
You just don't know if he will hit his potential, right? You just don't know like how well he deals with reading defenses and pre-snap stuff and all of that. But South Dakota State, I think, will be good on the offensive line again. They'll be good on the defensive line. New names at linebacker, but a lot of the young guys that were getting hyped up as the next big thing, they're all coming back. And so I think the front seven for South Dakota State should still be pretty good. Wide receiver is a concern, running back is a concern for the
Yeah.
Jackrabbits, but they typically find someone or a couple of guys that step up. So I still think South Dakota State will take a step back next year, but they'll still be as competitive as they ever as they've been. Just potentially quarterfinalists or semifinalists. After that, I really don't know. I think UIW could rise up. I think Tarleton could rise up. They should have good quarterback play. UC Davis loses a lot.
Yep.
Idaho loses a lot. Mercer loses a lot. So the top four are probably still going to be the semifinalists from this last year, just because all the other teams lose a
Right.
lot
Yep.
as well. And so, and I don't think like NDSU is the favorite, but I don't know with losing Cam Miller, they might not be as good next year as they were this year, but that doesn't mean they're still not the best team
Correct.
in the FCS. And so next year is not going to be wide open in the FCS title race, but it might be a bit more open just because all these teams
Yeah.
besides South Dakota are going to have new quarterbacks.
Montana State, by the way, opens at Oregon, then hosts the Jackrabbits in Bozeman. That is a heck of a way to start 2025. There's no easing in for Montana State next year.
Yeah, and South Dakota State, before that Montana State game, they play Sacramento State.
Correct. Yep.
Could be
Loaded.
maybe a sleeper team because they're bringing in a ton of FBS guys. They had a great head coach hired, put together a really good coaching staff. The question is Sac State even going to be eligible for the FCS playoffs this coming year? Because their president said last week, "Hey, we're going to FBS and we're going to FBS soon." So it's like, okay, I don't know a president that just says that if they don't know something is coming. And so if they join the FBS in 26, they would be ineligible for the playoffs in 25 if they follow kind of the usual transition period. But I think Sac State could be an interesting team this upcoming year.
That's why we got to have them on, because there's no off season for what's going on in college ball. Thanks so much for this, bud. You had a great year. We really appreciate you doing this, and we'll look forward to keep going on Mondays. All right.
All right. Sounds good with me. Thank you.
Sam Erner, each and every Monday at 9:35, giving us the lowdown on FCS football. We're overdue for a break. We'll take one now. We get caught up. Go to a couple emails. We'll wrap up our first hour. Jeff Kolpak coming up in our second hour on the Bison side of things. That's coming up as we roll on a chilly Monday morning. We're back after this.